Welcome to the Tough Decisions Network for Entrepreneurs. I'm Dan Hanford, and my wife, Danae, and I interview successful people sharing stories behind tough decisions that they've had to make along their journey as an entrepreneur. Before we get started, let's hear from one of our sponsors. Have you ever thought about investing in real estate, but find yourself so busy that you don't have time for it? Do you have FOMO, which is the fear of missing out? At HanfordCapital.com, we help investors with passive real estate investments that project better returns than traditional investment vehicles such as the stock market. If you'd like to find out more about our passive real estate investments, visit HanfordCapital.com. That's HANDFORD Capital.com. We will jump on a call with you to discuss your investment goals and to see if our investments are a good fit for you. This advertisement is not to be construed as an offer or recommendation to buy or sell a security. Visit HanfordCapital.com. On the podcast with us today is Devin Halden. He's an entrepreneur and has a focus on production and distribution of software and media properties across multiple platforms. Welcome to the podcast, Devin.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the invitation to chat with you guys today.
Hi, Devin. Wanted to see if you can get us started with just a little bit of your background about how you got into where you are today as an entrepreneur and business owner.
Yeah, for sure. I think probably like many other entrepreneurs had the bug or trait, whatever it is that we call it, and in me for as long as I can remember. Throughout college, I worked for my best friend's dad, who was an entrepreneur, and he had several businesses and restaurants, so I was able to learn quite a bit about many different facets of business. And over time, he actually became a great mentor, friend, and also an investor. So, I still enjoy taking him out to dinner just to sit and listen and soak things up. And then in college, I received an advertising degree. And after some time, I went off to grad school for advertising, specifically to work on my portfolio. And when I was there, I had the opportunity to work on several films in the area. And one obvious problem quickly became a common theme on each film set I worked on. And that was the fact that even though we're working really hard to make this movie, and in some cases, it's 200 plus people working on a film, the films would rarely find an audience. And when you don't have Hollywood marketing money, it's hard to get people to even be aware that the movie's been made. And so it became truly an environment of people collaborating and driven primarily through passion to be storytellers. But you need people to be a storyteller. You need to be able to tell your story to people. So in 2005, I decided to start Solstice Film Festival, which provided a platform for independent films like the ones I was working on and allowed them to find an audience. And as I was developing the event, I discovered that Hollywood studios, both majors and mini majors, use accredited film festivals to premiere films for a theatrical audience as a prerequisite to make their films eligible for an Academy Award. So I began building relationships with some of the bigger studios like Warner Brothers and DreamWorks, Lionsgate, Weinstein Company, and other studios that needed film festivals to premiere their films. And in turn, I was able to get films that local and national media outlets were interested in running stories about. So it gave us free publicity. But a film festival at the time, it wasn't a new thing. So I needed to create something different. And my main differentiator, and mind you, this was in 2004, 2005, was not only have a live event in St. Paul, Minnesota, but allow people from all over the world to have access to the movies we program. And at the time, no film festival had an online component. And my logic was, why have a ceiling or a capacity issue based on the number of seats in a physical theater when we can allow hundreds, thousands, maybe even millions of people to stream the same digital file, at least, anywhere, anytime. And unfortunately, the technology had not caught up with the idea at the time. And to build what we needed to securely stream a digital movie carried an astronomical price tag. So we did eventually launch the online component of Solstice Film Festival in 2010, but the years of doing all the R&D for it gave me an ancillary idea to launch an independent film streaming network. So in 2010, I stepped down from Solstice Film Festival to launch Pixovi Movie Network. And Pixovi started essentially as the Netflix of independent film. We offered fantastic splits with filmmakers and producers. And again, came up with ways to differentiate the experience. And, one example, we implemented technology for a social aspect that allowed people from different parts of the world to purchase a ticket for one of the films. They could select an avatar and they could actually sit in this virtual movie theater that we created, and they could chat while the movie was going on. And, however, the main issue when working in independent film is filmmakers typically don't have much money. And so whatever money they got their hands on, they put into making their film and didn't have anything left over to market their film. And what many indie filmmakers don't realize is even though the technology has democratized film production and film distribution in many ways, one constant that will always be true, and it's not specific to filmmaker to film distribution, is you have to market your film or your product and make people aware of it. If people don't know it exists, they will never find it and they'll never make money. And so you can produce the greatest film in the world, but if you can't reach an audience and make them aware of it, then no one's going to see it. And that really goes for anything and any business, really.
Well, that's what I was going to say too, Devin, is that, there's a lot of entrepreneurs that, create a product or a service, or they build a business, or they open up a brick and mortar location, and they spend all that time and energy and money and effort creating, but they forget that once it's been created, that they need to be able to start to market it. And,
Right.
Sometimes they run out of money because they spent too much time and effort and energy and money building, but not actually trying to figure out a way to sell their particular product or service. And that's a great point.
Exactly. And, and I consulted with independent filmmakers before, and I say, if you're lucky enough to get $1 million investment to make your movie for $100,000 and market the crap out of it for $900,000. That's how you're going to make money in filmmaking. And that's the only way you're going to make money in independent filmmaking.
What are some of the top ways that filmmakers promote their movie and kind of can spend that extra, 90% of their investment from an investor? If they spent, like you said, I got $1 million of an investor to come in and say, hey, make this movie. They've spent $100,000. Where would they go and spend that $900,000 to market their movie?
Well, that's the thing. You need to be strategic and wise with whatever kind of funds you have. You're not like the Hollywood films where they make a movie for $250 million and they spend another $200 million marketing it, so they can just puke all over all the media, and they can put it on TV, they can put it on billboards and all these other marketing avenues and outlets that cost a lot of money. And so if you have any type of marketing budget, always be thinking in the back of your mind that it's all grassroots. And so it's like, what can you do for free? And, what I learned with the film festival, and then I've even implemented it with other businesses I've started is, if you create a great product and you have a good story behind your product, you can send out press releases and you can try to get on podcasts, or you can talk to bloggers that have a good following, or, some other influencers, or so you can. There's a lot of things you can do that is either for free publicity or in kind, where you give me this, I'll give you that type of, a bartering system. So spend money if you have to spend money, but make sure you're spending money wisely. Like don't buy a billboard on I-94 and because you got some data that says, 100,000 cars drive past it a day. Well, you don't know what of those 100,000 cars, what people are actually looking at the billboard. And so Hollywood can do that. If you have multi-million-dollar budgets, go ahead and plaster your message or plaster your movie poster all over the world. But if you're an independent filmmaker and you have a very limited marketing budget, you really need to get strategic and figure out what can I do to get for free? And then of this money, how am I going to get the most eyeballs on it? And most of it's going to be digital. It's going to be digital marketing. It's going to be social media marketing. And it's, a lot of filmmakers even get on Netflix and they're like, well, my movie's on Netflix. I'm set. Well, again, it still falls into the problem that nobody knows about it. And Netflix certainly is going to put it on the first page where people are going to discover it or just stumble upon it. And so it's, even though technology has democratized the way, production, where you can actually shoot an incredible looking film on your iPhone and you can put it on Vimeo, or you can put it on YouTube, and you can try to get it on Netflix or Amazon even. But if people aren't aware of your product, then people won't find it. And, and that's the name of the game for anything.
I want you to walk us through a tough decision that you've had to make as an entrepreneur with these different, ventures that you've done. First, I want you to talk about one that, didn't really have the best outcome that you were expecting and some of the lessons that you learned through that tough decision.
Yeah. I'll preface this by saying I have a wonderful relationship with my failures or anything that didn't work out how I planned. And I say that because I've learned more from my mistakes and failures than I have from my successes, without a doubt.
I totally agree.
And I believe that's, I believe that's true for all entrepreneurs. As long as we maintain that right perspective about the journey we've decided to embark on. Having said that, I think Pixovi Movie Network, though it was a great learning experience, is probably one that falls into that category. It was a monster of a concept to get off the ground. The concept was sound, but I wanted what I wanted to do with it, technology-wise, it was incredibly ambitious. And then that red flag popped up. If I can't wait to get out of bed to go to work, or my mind stops coming up with new ideas and opportunities for the business, I know I'm in trouble. And so it was crushing in some respects because I built Pixovi to serve the world's incredible storytellers that couldn't find an audience. But in the same respect, Pixovi was built for the world's fans of great content, separate from what we can get from Hollywood. And it was a place for them to discover new voices and storytellers. But, that said, what we're currently working on building with how we pivoted with the Pixovi version 1 to what we're doing now, it's still going to be, products and services for filmmakers and content producers. It's just specifically product-based in marketing and selling directly to the customer rather than a full service conduit model. That was probably, in hindsight, some missteps were taken, and it probably, that was probably a decision I made that kind of had a negative outcome in a way.
As I'm hearing you talk about this, Devin, I'm thinking of the quote that you just had where you said, whenever you start to, whenever the business starts to wake you up at night, or you feel like when you wake up in the morning and you really don't want to go back to work and it's your own business and you start to have a lack of new ideas and new thoughts coming through, that you're kind of stuck, and you're almost kind of feeling like maybe I should get out of this, or maybe I should do something different. And I think that's a key point, because there are certain times where we come up with ideas as entrepreneurs and we put them into place, and then we realize, 6 steps in, 10 steps in, that it's really not the best decision. But I think sometimes we get caught up in the fact that, sometimes we're so far deep into something that we feel like, we just can't leave it. And so I think that that's really, one of the things that, you have to think about as an entrepreneur is it worth continuing this process if you feel like the writing is already on the wall, that maybe it's not the best thing right now, or maybe there's something else that you need to be doing?
Right. Yeah. And I think it's important to, everybody talks about, emotion. And it's about, there's a time when your emotion for the company is important. And it's usually when you're developing the brand and the look and the feel, and that's important. It's important to have emotion, but it's also very important to be able to make unemotional decisions. And you see it all the time, really, if you watch Shark Tank or you watch The Profit or some of these other shows that highlight struggling business, primarily The Profit. It's like these struggling businesses that when someone from the outside comes in, you can tell that these people have been so zoomed in to their product or their brand, and they're so in love with it that they don't see its faults, and they don't see how it could be better, and they don't see how maybe even just a couple tweaks here and there can actually make a huge difference. And so a lot of times there's all this pushback, and there's people don't want to change. And I think that's an important part of being an entrepreneur is growing through, and you're going to do it. It's going to happen through bad experiences. It's going to happen just through experiences, period. You're going to be able to figure out when those red flags pop up. When you actually do, you got to be like, all right, I got to stop. I got to zoom out. I got to take my emotion out of this, and I got to really figure out what's best for the company. And a lot of times, if it's not just a one-man show, you got to think what's best for the people that are counting on that company for being successful as well. So that's an important important trait of entrepreneurs, I think, that you kind of gain over time through different experiences.
Yeah. And Devin, one of the things I wanted to ask you about too is, you mentioned that, you have a wonderful relationship with your failures, which I think as entrepreneurs, we definitely need to have. And so because you have such a good relationship with all of your failures, I'm sure you could probably share with us a tough decision that you made that had a really positive outcome. So can you share with us one of those tough decisions?
Yeah, I think I can try to think of one. Just kidding. I would say my very first kind of big company, when I started Solstice Film Festival, is more of a hindsight example of that, where I'm very envious of who I was back then because I was so naive to what I was getting myself into that I just jumped in. And throughout building Solstice, I was told by nearly everyone that it was too ambitious and there was no way I could temporarily convert St. Paul, Minnesota into Hollywood. But I just didn't listen. And I stayed the course. And somehow the group of people I pulled together, we pulled it off. And we pulled it off for 5 years. And so there are times now when I'm working on something and I find myself either overthinking or trying to design an entire roadmap for a product, and then weeks or months slip away. And then I often try to channel my 25-year-old self and tap into that thought process or lack of thought process I had, and just launch and figure everything else out as I go. And so Solstice was, that was probably what I learned the most from that experience. Was you just have to jump in, and nothing's going to be perfect. Everybody tries to make, especially in software, we want every feature that we can think of to be in the version 1, and we want to make sure the app is perfect. And, sometimes you just got to whatever that MVP or that minimum viable product is, just get it out there and let people play around with it. Because a lot of times half those ideas that you come up with for your software or your mobile app that you think are a good idea, your actual users may not see any value in that. And so just get it out there and let them tell you what they want. And then you can build from there. But, sometimes I do that all the time. I overthink things. I try to make things perfect. I don't want to launch too soon. And sometimes I think there isn't a perfect time to do anything. So you might as well just get the product out there and let the users in the world tell you how to move forward.
I think you're definitely right about there is never the perfect time to do anything. So if you get caught up in the perfectionist part of it, then you probably are going to end up doing nothing, which is a lot of people with really great ideas run into. I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about your experience and how you've developed a strategy or technique for making these difficult decisions over these, 15, 20 years where you've had these different companies. What are the strategies that you use when you're faced with a difficult decision, whether it's, to move on from a business you're doing or to plow through and just put it out there despite what other people are saying? How do you come to those decisions that you need to make?
I like to weigh all my options. And so I'll try to study, depending on what the decision is, I'll try to gather as much data that's available to me and study that as kind of like a step one. But then I'll just drive. When I'm in the car, driving is what really calms me. And so it settles my mind, and I often come up with my best ideas when I'm in the car. And so, in the other important thing, and I think this is important for everybody, at least once a year, is like I'll remove myself from my known world or my everyday environment and go and experience something. And that's, it's being around new sights and smells and sounds and that all heightens everything. And so I call it a meat treat, and I think you have to do it by yourself. It's nice to also enjoy the company of yourself. So you don't always have to have friends or spouse or girlfriend with you, and just take like a weekend and just get out of your environment. And I think, as long as you get out of your comfort zone, it stimulates that mind, and I find things become clearer, and it allows me to zoom out of what my everyday, even though you may think that you're not micromanaging a company or micromanaging yourself or employees. A lot of times you don't really realize how zoomed in you were with blinders on to a situation until you completely remove yourself from that everyday environment that you're used to, and you're getting new stimulations from all over the place, whether that's a vacation or, I'll just drive up North Minnesota. There's, we land at 10,000 lakes. I can always find a cabin on a lake and then just sit there and think, and just, or get in a fishing boat without a fishing rod, and just float. And I think calming your mind and zooming out and allowing yourself to be out of your comfort zone will really help you make better decisions, not only for a tough decision specifically that you're worried about or you're thinking about, but also if you're coming up with new ideas for your company or you have a new venture in mind. It's talking to different people and new experiences and new adventures. I think that really stimulates every aspect of us. And I think our mind and our creativity really benefits from being taken out of our comfort zone.
Do you have a book or a resource that you'd recommend to our listeners? Something that has affected the way that you make decisions or the way you run your business?
Yeah, I would actually recommend 2 books, and there's a reason why I'll recommend 2 books. And both are related to Walt Disney. And so one is his biography, Walt Disney, The Triumph of American Imagination by Neil Gabler. And so I've read many books on Disney, but I feel this book does a great job and it's very detailed and thorough about Disney's life from a boy to eventually becoming one of the most important figures in 20th century America, really, in both the entertainment industry as well as just American culture. And so reading it highlights how important it is to chase your passion, and passion will trump embarking on anything in life strictly for money every time. And so if you study Walt's life, it really epitomizes what it means to not have a plan B. And so it's like you only have one plan, and it takes grit and drive and the ability to navigate the rough patches and the valleys of both business and personal life, that they're the true hallmarks of a pioneer. And then the other book is Disney War by James B. Stewart, I believe, James B. Stewart. And I would read them in that order. First read the Walt Disney biography and then Disney War. And it's a great juxtaposition between Walt running the company and then his various successors running the company. And so Disney Wars essentially just covers the 20-year tenure of Michael Eisner when he was chairman and CEO of the Walt Disney Company. And it's really a fascinating look into the business of Hollywood and media entertainment through the 80s and 90s, and even into the early 2000s. And, the 80s were a rough time for the Disney Company. And in fact, it was close to being taken over by corporate raiders, and who would have broken the company up and just sold it for parts. But Eisner and then Jeffrey Katzenberg were brought in to try and right the ship, so to speak, and which they did. And it started with like The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and so this whole animation revival at Disney took off. And that's also the time that Ed Catmull and Steve Jobs spun Pixar out of Lucasfilm, and they produced Toy Story for Disney. But the book is really a fantastic snapshot of, like I said, the business landscape of Hollywood at the time. But there's a ton of lessons on what not to do and how not to act when you're in position of power. And it shows how the big egos often get in the way or fog our ability to make calculated or unemotional decisions like we talked about before.
I mean, Disney has made a lot of decisions through his, creation of Disney. And so in those books, he actually dives into a lot of, as the topic of the podcast is tough decisions. He's gone through some of those tough decisions that he's had to make along that way. Well, Devin, I really do appreciate your time for being with us today. You've provided a lot of value, and I would love to have you on a future podcast as well, so you can dive through some more of your knowledge behind being an entrepreneur, especially in that filmmaker industry. So I really appreciate your time with us today. How can the listeners reach out to you if they want to follow you or get some more information from you, Devin?
Probably the best way right now is the current company I have. That's the main company we're working on, Storyosophy. And so if you just go to storyosophy.com, that's basically where we're building software right now for writers and storytellers. And then we also have the Storyosophy podcast that I do with my writing partner, Adam Jones. And so we kind of dissect films and novels and story structure, tips and tricks.
And we'll make sure we put that in the show notes as well, so that people that are listening, they want to make sure they get the spelling right, or have a link to the podcast. We'll put those in the show notes so they can link straight to it. Thank you so much, Devin, for being on the podcast with us. Hope you have a good rest of your day. And again, thank you so much for being on with us.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you so much for the invitation.
All right, you too. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Tough Decisions Network. Be sure to visit toughdecisions.net to gain access to show notes for this episode and to join our free weekly entrepreneur email where we will send you news about the latest technology for your business, inspiring quotes, and the latest books for entrepreneurs. That's toughdecisions.net.